Tonight, the time before time began, the universe, black holes, God and the laws of science. Professor Stephen Hawking, Dr. Carl Sagan and Arthur C. Clarke discuss the mysteries man faces as he starts to explore the stars. Dreadful disabilities prevent Stephen Hawking from speaking a word, but he's risen above them to become a brilliant mathematician and teacher. Using a computer-driven voice synthesizer, he's told the world how the universe began, and now he's seeking the ultimate theory of how it works.
We are the masters of time and space.
And we all drive jaguars.
And as I started digging into Stephen Hawking, now obviously I didn't do too much research into him. It would be really, really extensive if you get into all his degrees and universities and schools that he went to. But the thing that really hit me as I started looking at him, just from Wikipedia here, is that he is shown to be a lifetime member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. And, you know, amongst all the different groups and societies and schools and universities, alma maters, whatever you want to call it, this man is a lifetime member of this particular organization, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. And that should give you a clue right away, because we know that the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, is associated with the Vatican.
Georges Lemaitre received any number of honors, becoming a member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and the Belgian Royal Academy of Sciences and Arts, and receiving the Eddington Medal from the Royal Astronomical Society of Great Britain. So, as the poster in the meme proclaims, if you like the Big Bang Theory, thank a priest.
With the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so that right away should give you a clue as to who Stephen Hawking really is. I wouldn't be surprised if he is part of the Jesuit order, or at least, you know, associated with them, is part of spreading the deception. We know that the Vatican is preparing a lot of documents, whether it's about climate change, which they've already issued an encyclical last year through Pope Francis. I've been hearing through people like Tom Horn and L.A. Marzulli that they are preparing more paperwork for the arrival of aliens. We have someone who goes by the name of Father Giuseppe Tanzanella Nitti. He is also a professor at the Vatican University, and he is quoted as saying very soon, we will not have to deny our Christian faith, but there is information coming from another world, and once it is confirmed, it is going to require a rereading of the gospel as we know it. So can you see what he is saying here? Basically, they're saying that information is coming from another world very soon. They are preparing the masses for this alien savior that is coming. I'm sure many of you have heard of Guy Consolmagno, who is part of the Lucifer Telescope Project and is also a Jesuit Vatican astronomer, and he is quoted as saying he's going to baptize aliens. Even Pope Francis is quoted as saying that. So I believe the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, is very much preparing people for something, and the fact that Stephen Hawking is a lifetime member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, could it be that he is just playing a role as to, you know, preparing the masses for what is definitely coming, the arrival of an alien savior? Another thing I found interesting as I looked into just pictures of Stephen Hawking, you see him right here with Jim Carrey. You know, how interesting that Jim Carrey was also a big part of that show of In Living Color. And even in the beginning of The Handyman, his two parents were white and Jim Carrey was the father. And here you've got now Jim Carrey, you know, having relations, or having a relationship, I should say, a friendship with Stephen Hawking. So a little bit of an interesting connection there that I found quite fascinating as I was, you know, digging into Stephen Hawking. And here you go. There's Jim Carrey right there. there's his wife, and here's, Damon Wayans playing, handyman. And he, when he became handyman or got the superpowers, he drank a blue vial, and he all of a sudden had this vision, literally, of a man that kind of looked like him with white hair, telling him who he was, that he was like the savior, that he was, sent to Earth and with a special calling and with powers and all this kind of thing. So interesting that you got Jim Carrey here, in a friendship with Stephen Hawking, and he is, yet again on the show with, as I guess, the adopted father of Handyman. All right, so I found that a little bit interesting. And another thing that I found quite fascinating, and I learned this actually through Jeranism, is even just the face of Stephen Hawking back in his early days, when he was younger. Now this to me looks like the real guy. Okay, you can see, his facial features. You can see that his mouth, his teeth are pretty much in the same kind of row. There's nothing, different about that. But when you look at him today, he looks completely different. What is with this teeth? And, the fact that he looked like this before, you can see that his dental features, his teeth and his mouth are very different than what he is now. And, I've heard that people like to say that he was in an accident or something like that, but it still doesn't really make sense as to how he can go from looking like this to looking like this. It just doesn't make any sense. Not that I'm trying to make fun of him. We obviously have to respect all of our fellow human beings, but I'm saying that he is definitely not looking the same as he used to be. So I believe something is up here. I believe that could it possibly be that Stephen Hawking, or the Stephen Hawking that we know today, is possibly not the real Stephen Hawking? Could he be someone else? Could he be an imposter? Could he literally be a prop that the Illuminati is using to basically tell us whatever they want to tell us? We know that he speaks through a computer. So, when you think about that just for a minute, speaking through a computer, now that could be anything that the Illuminati wants him to say. He speaks through this machine. So could it be that whatever's coming out of that machine is exactly what the establishment, the Illuminati, wants us to believe? Something to think about. And another thing that we need to consider is that the fact that Stephen Hawking has lived with this disease called ALS for 70 years. Now, how is that even possible? Because he has had this debilitating condition. And how is it that he has beaten these odds? And he's pretty much one of the only ones who has done that. Okay, Stephen Hawking turned 70 on Sunday, so this article is back from 2012, beating the odds of a daunting diagnosis by nearly half a century. The famous theoretical physicist has helped to bring ideas about black holes and quantum gravity to a broad public audience. And that's something I want you to also remember, ideas. We need to really realize that these theories are just that a lot of these things that scientists, whether it's Stephen Hawking, whether it's Bill Nye, whether it's any of these Richard Dawkins and all these other evolutionists, we have to realize that everything that they present are just theories. None of this has actually been proven. It is all theoretical, but it's being taught as fact in the schools, and even the media and the government and what have you push these theories onto us, and they actually have never been proven to be true. So he's had only ideas about black holes, quantum gravity, and a bunch of other topics. But, he has been confined to a wheelchair by form of a motor neuron disease, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is ALS. And since 1985, he has had to speak through his trademark computer system, which he operates with his cheek, and have round-the-clock care. So again, how is this even possible that, one guy, I guess people could argue that he has, top-notch care, and that's why he's been able to beat it for so long. But I'm having a hard time really in this day and age believing that, especially with all the deception that is forced down our throats, But his disease, as this writer goes on today, seems hardly to have slowed him down. Hawking spent 30 years as a full professor of mathematics at the University of Cambridge, and he is currently the director of research at the school's Center for Theoretical Cosmology. Okay, but like his mind, Hawking's illness seems to be singular. Most patients with ALS, known as Lou Gehrig's disease, for the famous baseball player who succumbed to the disease, are diagnosed at the age of 50 and die within 5 years of their diagnosis. Hawkins' condition was first diagnosed when he was 21, and he was not expected to see his 25th birthday. But here he is, many years later, he's still alive and kicking. You see him in TV shows, you see him in commercials, you see him in movies, you see him all over the place. And how is it that he's been able to be a professor for over 30 years? He's been able to, do so many things, but he has this particular disease. And this article goes on to make a case basically as to why they believe that he's still alive. Of course, this is from good old Scientific American, so I really don't believe anything that they're saying. But I know you could look at this article for yourself, and I'm not trying to say that I fully believe, or that I would expect you to believe what I'm saying. I have a hunch that Stephen Hawking, that we know, the man that we think is Stephen Hawking is possibly not the real Stephen Hawking. And so obviously that is just a theory of mine right now, but I'm just, trying to say that possibly we have been led to believe something that is a lie, okay? And possibly the fact that this is something that a disease that is very, very known to be a person can last only basically about up to 5 years. But how is it when it says how frequent are these cases of very slow progressing forms of ALS? And the author says, I would say probably less than a few percent. So very convenient that Stephen Hawking just happens to be in that few percent. How much do you think Stephen Hawking's longevity has been due to an excellent care that he has received versus the biology of his particular form of ALS? And then I guess they just get pretty much vague here. It's probably a bit of both. I just know him from television, so I don't know what kind of interventions he's had. All right, so again, this writer is saying they only know him from television, and that's the same with, the general public. We only know Stephen Hawking from television. We don't know him personally. We've never, most likely never seen him, in real life. We pretty much only see this character, this Stephen Hawking, on television. All right, so really, is he even real? Is he even a real person? And again, he could be someone that is, a prop used by the Illuminati to do their bidding and to, basically forward an agenda to program us and to give us the messages that the Illuminati wants us to believe.
We are the masters of time and space.
And we all drive Jaguars. Ha, ha, ha.
Arthur C. Clarke invented the communication satellite long before the technology existed to launch one. That vision of the future fathered the global village.
Democratic Senator Russell B. Long of Louisiana said of the act, "When this bill first started out, I thought it was as crooked as a dog's hind leg. I am now convinced that would be a compliment. This bill is as crooked as a barrel of snakes." The American Telephone and Telegraph Company argued that using space for communications was just a modern representation of the submarine communications cables currently in use. AT&T proposed joint ownership of all the communication satellites with control based on these system facilities. Now, basically what this is saying is all these groups got together and said, let's all cheat people. Let's all screw people. You don't just get to screw them. We're all going to screw them.
That vision of the future fathered the global village. His novels and stories, including 2001: A Space Odyssey, have inspired a generation of real-life astronauts.
And you can see on the back of his shirt a couple of upticks on either side.
Carl Sagan sent man's first messages to the stars aboard NASA space probes. He's sure we're not alone in the cosmic wilderness. Dr. Sagan joined our discussion from Cornell University in New York State, so I checked whether he could hear us over one of Arthur's satellites.
You seen one up in the sky. You can't see him with the naked eye, because a satellite is about the size of a car, at least 300 miles away. You can't see that far, whatever those dots are that move in the night. I'm telling you that ain't no satellite. Welcome to the satellite hoax. Just another one of them NASA jokes. You can't find me a picture of a satellite without bringing up a bunch of that CGI. Just a bunch of cartoons all over the place when I search satellites in space. Yeah, type that phrase into Google, folks. Let me welcome you to the satellite. Yeah.
Yes, communication satellite technology is working very well, thank you.
Arthur, can you hear all right?
I can hear fine.
And Professor Hawking, are you in touch with Carl Sagan?
Yes.
Do you hear me?
Yes, sir. We have you loud and clear.
Who's ready to go to Mars up there?
We are absolutely ready to go to Mars.
Yes, communication satellite technology is working very well, thank you.
Professor Hawking, in fact, has just made publishing history by writing a book about hard theoretical science which has outsold even Michael Jackson in the bestseller lists. It's called A Brief History of Time, and we'll be talking about the concepts that are in it. Now, Stephen Hawking is engaged in a search for the ultimate answer, a grand unified theory that would explain everything.
But everything now is based upon Greek atomism. That's all general relativity and quantum mechanics is nothing other than atomism. If you don't know what atomism is, then I suggest you look it up. It basically means that the whole universe is just a giant bag of magical, unseen particles rolling around like BBs and volleyballs, you know, they're bumping into each other. And of course, they've never defined a field. Never. They never will define a field because fields are particle-free. They'll never define instantaneous action at a distance, such as EPR. Look up EPR paradox. But we know that it exists. See, faster than light travel, instantaneous action at a distance contradicts the entire premise of general relativity and quantum mechanics, and so does the denotation of the term field, which has never been explained, never been defined. Human understanding is still in the Stone Ages. We think are so advanced with our computers and our TV sets, but ultimately we're pretty stupid. So ultimately, let's look again. Remember back to the Ferrel cell. I said, you see this again? This toroidal form that you see underneath the Ferrel cell? That's magnetism as painted by light. Tim van der Rijl's wonderful invention. So you could think of this as a 0-point ether pressure that has been released, longitudinal, the expression of that form in transverse, reciprocating precessional hyperboloid is magnetism. We have ultimately only one field, dielectricity. We have the loss of that field's potential, just like releasing charge on a battery, for example. And the release of that field, i.e. inertia, i.e. dielectricity, is force in motion. Okay? 100% of the visible universe is this, is magnetism. Okay? The entire atomic structure of an atom in picometers, as it measured in picometers, is due to magnetism, not dielectricity. So we have one field, one release of that field's potential, i.e. the loss of that inertia, as expressed in force and motion, and we have two field modalities, one being electricity, okay, frequency and amplitude, and the other one being gravity, which is a dielectric condensate. We have a nucleus, okay, right here we have tons of magnetodielectric space created. Okay, space is not a thing. Space is neither a field nor a force. Space acts on nothing. Space does nothing. This is the ultimate brain virus and huge flaw that Tesla says over and over again, as well as others.
We are the masters of time and space.
Of general relativity is reified space as something that does something. It's like saying a shadow has done something, or a shadow is the absence of something. Okay, the absence of inertia, let's just consider the central point here, which is not a point, it's even prior to a point, that the loss of that inertia is expressed in force and motion, leaves behind it a wake that us humans and our stupidity, all of us, call space. Okay, we live in it, we breathe in it because we're all existential beings, but that space is neither a field nor a force. It does nothing and it acts on nothing. So here we have a dielectric condensate we call mass or matter, in its most simplex form, obviously. An oversimplification, to be sure, with this model, which is a toroflux, by the way. This cute little toy is called a toroflux. It's a neat little device that every little child should have that gets them thinking in multi-dimensional geometric fashions. So, that's the irreducible simplicity of the universe. I have to stick fast to this and say that it's absolutely irrefutable. As far as a grand unified theory, I mean, it's already been discovered. Whether anybody accepts it or not, you know, doesn't make any difference to me.
That would explain everything. Stephen Hawking, that is quite an agenda. How are you getting on with it? Let me just explain that what happens when Professor Hawking wishes to speak. He lost his voice a couple of years ago and now has to use a voice synthesizer, and he can control a squeeze box in his hand, and on the VDU screen on the arm of his chair he's got a vocabulary which scrolls through, and he can pick out the words that he wants, and these words are then assembled into a sentence, and when the sentence is ready then he can process it through the voice synthesizer. So whenever you're ready, Professor Hawking, we'd like to hear from you.
In the last 300 years, we have discovered the laws that govern the universe in all but the most extreme conditions. I think there is a reasonable chance that we may find a complete set of laws by the end of the century if we don't blow ourselves up first. If we do find a complete unified theory, it will be a great triumph, not just for scientists, but for ordinary people as well. In time, the unified theory would be simplified and taught in schools, at least in outline. Then, everyone would have some idea of how the universe works.
Well, that is a tremendous vision. Now, Carl Sagan, you wrote an introduction to the book, and one of the striking things that you said is that it's only children nowadays who ask the big questions because they don't know enough not to.
What I was trying to get across was the notion that the school systems, it seems to me, have a attitude of discouragement of asking fundamental questions. If a 5 or 6 year old asks why the moon is round or why grass is green, the usual adult answer, at least in my experience, is to discourage the child. Say, what shape did you expect the moon to be? Square? Or what color did you expect the grass to be? Blue?
We did not speak about the thing I came to talk about.
We make him welcome. Speak, anyone.
Kiowa Pacer is true earth, round like ball. White man live all side.
Tell me, why men on bottom not fall off?
Never been there. Maybe they do.
The usual adult answer, at least in my experience, is to discourage the child. Say, what shape did you expect the moon to be? Square? Or what color did you expect the grass to be? Blue?
When everyone thought the world was flat.
Instead of saying that those are interesting questions, let's try to find out the answer, or maybe nobody knows the answer, and when you grow up, you'll be able to discover the answer.
My institute, saying that unless I changed my line of research, that they would have to take away my telescope time.
You grow up, you'll be able to discover the answer. It would be very healthy for the human species if there were less discouragement and more scientists.
Unless I changed my line of research, that they would have to take away my telescope time.
Arthur Clarke.
One of the reasons why I write science fiction is because it does free the imagination and does inspire people to become scientists and astronauts. Many astronauts have made me feel a very old man by coming up and saying to me, you know, your books turned me on when I was a small boy.
Made me feel a very old man. Your books turned me on when I was a small boy.
Excellent. Now, I have planned a reasonably finite structure for our little colloquium, and I'd like to start, if I may, with Professor Hawking. How did the universe start? With a Big Bang?
We observe that distant galaxies are moving away from us. This means that they must have been closer together in the past.
Standard theories dictate the faster an object recedes from Earth, the farther away it is, because the primordial Big Bang explosion is supposed to have imparted an initial push that's causing the universe to expand. Using those theoretical parameters, a faster recessional velocity means greater distance, which means an earlier time period in the universe. And since an object almost 11 billion light years away is from the so-called early days of the universe, it shouldn't exhibit such complexity of form because there wasn't enough time since the Big Bang for that complexity to evolve.
Astronomers are surprised to find a high redshift galaxy with spiral structure. It has a redshift of 2.18, and most galaxies with that high of a redshift have irregular shapes. This one has well-defined arms, and it even has a companion at the end of one of them. The Big Bang theory assumes that redshift is an indicator of distance, which would put this galaxy at about 11 billion light years away. If it's that far away, it's therefore large and bright. But modern astronomy dismissed the observations of many astronomers in the last half of the 20th century, astronomers like Halton Arp and the Burbages. They found that high redshift objects tend to cluster around nearby low redshift objects. They found many physical connections, and they even found some high redshift objects in front of low redshift objects. These observations were misrepresented, and the misrepresentations were disproved. So with that excuse, the observations were dismissed and the Big Bang theory was saved. This is kind of a new scientific method. Instead of observation, theory, and testing, the data is judged by its conformity with belief. If it doesn't conform, then there's something wrong with the data, and the data is dismissed. In this case, fervency of belief replaces testing. If redshift is not proportional to distance, then the universe is not expanding, and there's no Big Bang.
The same electric force responsible for a galaxy's redshift may also give rise to its spiraling structure and other features such as polar jets.
One of the most significant contributors, I would say, to plasma cosmology and the electric universe theory was Dr. Anthony Peratt, a plasma physicist. And he was a protege of Hans Alfvén, the famous Nobel laureate. And Peratt studied plasma formations in the laboratory for many years. And what he did was create what are called particle and cell animations on supercomputers. Galaxies are, rather than being condensations of gas and dust that are gravitationally bound together, were actually plasma formations. And he thought that these simulations showed that cosmic plasma is confined due to self-consistent magnetic fields. And these magnetic fields are induced by currents that are flowing through the plasma, creating filamentary structures. And a cross-section through these filamentary structures indicated the formation of several galaxy configurations. And among those configurations were elliptical and barred spiral shapes. So Peratt insisted that plasma, along with electricity, engenders the structures in the universe. And since galaxies are often strung like pearls through space, or like beads on a string, that galactic arrangement lends credence to that idea.
In fact, one can show that all the galaxies must have been on top of each other about 15 billion years ago. This was a real Big Bang, not a puny thing that took place on the stock exchange a couple of years ago.
What role did the rating agencies play in this?
They were handmaidens to Wall Street. The ratings agencies get paid by Wall Street, by Merrill Lynch, by Citigroup, by Morgan Stanley, by Goldman Sachs, to rate the bonds that Wall Street creates. This creates a certain moral hazard.
You write in the book that Goldman essentially took the worst stuff that they couldn't sell, they repackaged it and took it to Moody's and got Moody's to rate it AAA?
Correct.
How? Did they know that Moody's was going to rate it AAA?
Yes. They had helped design the models, I'm sure, that Moody's used to rate the bonds. And I've spoken with people at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs who said we helped the ratings agencies understand these things.
They were the educators.
Yeah, they were the educators.
It was the beginning of the universe and of time itself. Anything that happened before the Big Bang could not affect what happened after. So we can neglect events before the Big Bang and say that time began at the Big Bang. After the Big Bang, we believe that the universe expanded in a very rapid, inflationary manner. Again, this inflation in the universe quite puts modern economic inflation in the shade. An increase of billions of percent, billions of billions of percent, in a tiny fraction of a second. Of course, that was before the present government. During the inflationary period, the universe borrowed heavily from its gravitational energy to finance the creation of more matter. The result was a triumph for the economics of Keynes. A vigorous and expanding universe filled with material objects.
Peculiar galaxy NGC 7603, discovered 30 years ago by Halton Arp, is one of the more striking examples of galaxy-quasar connections. It has recently been re-examined after the discovery of 2 new quasar-type objects embedded in the connecting filament.
In the year 2001, when the 2 young Spanish astronomers worked on this with the Las Palmas telescope, they saw that there were these 2 condensations, stellar condensations. They looked like quasars, but everybody would have said that they had to have the same redshift as the central galaxy because they were obviously in this filament that had been ejected. What they found was that each of these objects had a much higher redshift, and that the filament itself had the same redshift and spectral composition as the galaxy from which it was ejected.
A galaxy, which is an active galaxy, 2 low redshift quasars, and another galaxy with twice the redshifts. In other words, you had 4 objects all connected together, apparently by a luminosity, by a luminous bridge, each with a different redshift. Now that, I would say, is pretty conclusive evidence for the existence of non-cosmological redshifts.
Conclusive evidence that the expanding universe was not correct and that the redshift distance law was not correct.
The debt of gravitational energy will not have to be repaid until the end of the universe.
Well, I'd like to stay with this basic proposition for the time being, the Big Bang Theory. And to come to you, Carl Sagan, could you help me by putting into layman's terms what was involved with this Big Bang?
Well, here we are on a planet.
Totally glitching. The car's not glitching out, it's just the Earth. And then they cut the feed. Oh shit.
Which is about 5,000 million years old. The sun around which it goes is not much older.
Think with me. If the moon is moving away at 2 inches per year now, well, if I go back 1 year, it would be 2 inches closer, correct? Another year would be 2 inches closer. But as the moon starts to come back towards the Earth, well, then the force of gravity starts to increase. Is that correct? And the rate at which the moon comes back gets faster and faster, correct? Now, again, as I said, you can prove this in a laptop computer. If you go back in time, the moon would come back in, spiral in, and hit the Earth 1.4 billion years ago. Now, evolutionists say that the Earth and the moon are the same age. They say they're 4.5 to 5 billion supposed years old. Most of them say 4.6 billion.
About 5,000 million years old.
But if evolutionists were telling the truth, then that would mean that the moon was attached to the Earth for the first 3.6 billion years. Is that correct? And then it has been moving away ever since. Have I got that right? Hello?
Arthur, can you hear all right?
I can hear fine.
Hello? Let's think about this too. If the moon comes back towards the Earth and the force of gravity gets ever larger, well, what's it going to do? Well, what is the major physical impact of the moon upon the Earth? It is tides, correct? Now, if the moon starts to come back towards the Earth, well, let's think about this. If the moon comes back towards the Earth, the tides would get higher and higher, correct? Right? Now, if you go back 1/2 billion years, and again, just on a laptop computer, well, the tides on Earth would rise 1 mile high twice a day. I think my first question would be, do you know how to breathe underwater? And keep in mind, if the tides rise 1 mile twice a day, just in your mind start thinking about erosion for just a minute, okay? As a matter of fact, think with me for a moment. Since the Roman times, 2,000 years ago, the English North Sea coast has eroded 2 miles west along the east coast of England. We know of 35 villages in the Roman census 2,000 years ago that have been completely lost into the sea. That's an average of 5 foot per year. Clearly that erosion rate, cannot have been going on for millions and millions of years. Is that right? There simply wouldn't be an England. There simply wouldn't be an England.
It is part of a galaxy which is perhaps 10 or 12,000 million years old, which is one of perhaps hundreds of thousands of millions of other galaxies.
This is just an image I grabbed of, you can just go grab some high quality images of the Milky Way, preferably if there's a slightly overexposed one. So this is an image of just the Milky Way, and I was just kind of pointing out that if you can take a grease pencil, whatever, print off a picture of this, and if you can see my little pointer cursor, if you trace down one side of the Milky Way, and you can actually trace the light side, and then you can trace the dark side, and you'll see that it's an exact perfect mirror image of itself, right? So that, to me, indicates that you're looking through double layers. So it's one layer reflecting the top layer, and in between, you're actually looking through it at a bit of an angle, so you're seeing something that's actually through the other side. And when we zoom out a little bit, you'll see that in the water, if you compare the number of stars in the sky compared to those in the water, you'll see that you can line them up quite well with the brighter ones will actually line up and reflect in the water. But all these other ones are missing, like they just don't appear in the water at all. And there's lots of images, just pull up, flat water lake, saltwater lake, star, night skies, and you see it's pretty consistent with all the photography. So to me, that just tells me you can line up these two stars here with these two stars in the water. Sure, there's a bit of an angle because you're an observer on the ground, but it doesn't account for the lack of stars in the water that should be there.
So basically,
and they're just not.
What you're saying then, Chris, is because we're seeing this effect, that these stars, the star field actually has a somewhat of a polarized direction to them. Is that what I'm hearing here?
Exactly. So the level or the layer of the star field in the celestial dome, they call it the firmament, with the crystal median, superfluid crystals, it polarizes light in such a way that some of the light is coming towards us from the crystals in the star field, stars, right? Some of it's coming in our direction. Some of it's going back out towards the top layer of the dome firmament, and you're seeing a secondary image being created. But now what you're doing is you're looking through a one-way mirror, but there's two layers, so you're looking like into an infinity mirror, right? So it's just reflecting itself and reflecting itself and reflecting itself, and you'll see millions of stars when in fact it could only be a couple 100,000 or whatever. But you keep seeing over and over and over the same star duplicating itself. So it's polarized in a direction. It certainly has a direction to it. Yeah.
Wow, that certainly goes against the heliocentric model, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, it certainly does.
Yeah.
And none of this, planets, suns, galaxies, was around at the time of the Big Bang. At the time of the Big Bang, there was energy, elementary particles, which slowly evolved into the kind of universe we know today.
A vast cloud of gas and dust hangs in space. hangs in space.
Now let's turn it on and let's see what happens. Oh my God, look at it. Woo! This is awesome. They all pop.
Hangs in space.
They all pop.
We are the product of a grand evolutionary sequence, cosmic evolution, about which we are only occasionally aware. One of the great accomplishments of Dr. Hawking is to plug us better in to the knowledge of this long evolutionary sequence.
Well, what I have in my mind is a picture that Carl Sagan had been leading me towards of the whole universe in quite amazingly small packages, like putting the whole world into a matchbox, as it were, immensely dense and immensely tiny. And in fact, so tiny it's kind of disappearing into a little point. Is this the earliest imaginable point that our minds are taking us to so far, Carl Sagan?
Well, as Dr. Hawking said, the galaxies are expanding, running away from each other. The further away they are from each other, the faster they are running away. If you run the cosmic movie back into time, you come to a moment, perhaps 15,000 million years ago, in which all the matter in the universe was touching in, if you like, a point.
There's a large body of work going on, observational work, theoretical work, which is based on the assumption that quasars are at their cosmological distances. If it turns out seriously that we're right, then all that work is in vain. We don't know anything like as much as we think we do by saying that the quasars are far away. And that's another huge problem for people to face up to.
Suddenly there appeared press releases from Space Telescope Science Institute, which was the research arm of NASA's Hubble Space Telescope. And this press release said that they were not connected. And it gave a Hubble Space Telescope picture. It was not very deep, and you could just see two objects and no connection between them. And in this press release, then they said that this proved that there was no contradiction with the current expanding universe paradigm.
No connection between the two objects. So I looked at their picture, then I downloaded it, and it took me 5 minutes to show that it's still there. Now, I don't know what it is, but I think you face up to the existence of the feature, and then you consider conventional and unconventional explanations. But I was really surprised that they felt it necessary to issue a press release saying, it's not there, it's not real. It's the same thing we saw 20 years ago.
But it's hard to get people to look at this because they don't understand it. You see, it's again the non-cosmological redshifts.
We realized that the people who had been processing the pictures and released it must have known that the bridge was there, and yet they chose to try to convince the public that in fact it wasn't there and that everything was right with the current expanding universe paradigm. One of the frightening things, I think, for conventional astronomers is to accept the fact, or to realize that these intrinsic redshifts for the quasars and peculiar galaxies and so on, active galaxies, means that a lot of the things which we thought were out at great distance in the universe are very much closer in.
And a key unanswered and perhaps unanswerable question is, where did all of that matter energy come from? What was before that? And if it was made from nothing, who made it? And who made the maker? And of course an infinite regress behind that. Who made the maker?
Who created God? Now, the question itself is actually a fallacy. It doesn't make sense. How can God be created? He wouldn't be God if he was created. He always existed. Now you're going to say, how could God always exist? Where did he come from? Well, if he always existed, he didn't come from anywhere. He's always been there. And so you say, how is that possible? Well, that's a fair question, so let's answer that. There's a general principle that says either everything came from nothing, which is impossible, or something always existed and created everything that is created. You have no other choice, so which is it? Did everything come from nothing, which is impossible, or did something always exist? Which is it? Well, if you're on the side of logic, you'll certainly agree that nothing can only make nothing, so something obviously created everything, and whatever created everything obviously always existed. So let's just try and figure out what always existed, because some people will simply say, okay, so if something always existed, then the universe, matter, time, and space has always existed, and we don't need to invoke the God into the equation. Well, here's the problem with that. To claim something is eternal, which means it's always existed and always will exist, to claim the universe is eternal is to apply properties of infinity to the universe. So let's try and apply properties of infinity, or eternality, to matter, time, and space, and if we can show you that matter, time, and space could not be eternal or infinite, that means they are created by something that is not made of matter, time, and space, which would then have the properties of God, being immaterial, eternal, and omnipresent, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so let's start by showing you that matter, time, and space cannot be eternal. Let's take time first. Time is the measure of changes in matter. So imagine flicking a light switch once, okay? Now if I said, I'm going to give you a chocolate bar after you flip a light switch an infinite amount of times, would I ever give you the chocolate bar? The answer is no, because you can't flip a light switch an infinite amount of times. You'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'd go on forever, and you'd never reach infinity. You would always have a finite amount of light switch flicks. So you can't reach infinity using finite instances, or another way of putting it, you can't have an infinite amount of finite things. So time, we know, had a beginning because there could not have been an infinite amount of time before right now. That's simply logical. Or, just so you can get your head around it, could there be an infinite amount of changes, because time is the measure of change? Could there be an infinite amount of changes between two events? Like the chocolate bar example, could I give you something between now and an event in the future if there's an infinite amount of changes, time, between the two events? No, of course not. So that means there couldn't have been an infinite amount of time changes before right now, because we never would have reached this moment in time. Now, if time is finite, which means time had a beginning, and you can't have matter without time, because if you have matter, when do you put it? But there's another way to prove matter can't be infinite either. It's the same way as using the light switch. If there can't be an infinite amount of finite things, then all we need to do is show you that matter itself is finite. So take the nearest object to you, and the nearest one to me is my microphone, or my mouse and keyboard. How many times would I have to multiply, subtract, add, or divide my mouse and keyboard or microphone against itself in order to reach infinity? Well, let's try it. I have one mouse and keyboard. Let's add another one. So now I have 2 mice and keyboard. Let's add another one. Now I have 3 mice and keyboard. How many times would I have to do this in order to reach infinity? The answer is I would never reach infinity, for the same reason you can't flick the light switch an infinite amount of times. So that proves there's only a finite amount of matter, because you can't have an infinite amount of finite things. So we know that matter and time are finite, which means they had a beginning, that they are created, that they cannot be infinite, which means space cannot be infinite, because space is only the measure of the distance between matter, and if matter ceased to exist, there'd be a vacuum, there'd be no space. So if matter is finite, that means space is finite, because there's only a finite distance between the 2 farthest pieces of matter in all of reality. So we know matter, time, and space are finite. They're not infinite, therefore they're not eternal. That means they had a beginning. So what created matter, time, and space? Well, if something exists without matter, time, and space, that means, well, let's figure out the properties of something that exists without matter, time, and space. Well, if you exist without time, and time is the measure of change, that means you never change. That means there's no past or future, there's only an eternal now. Has it ever occurred to you that nothing ever occurred to God? The past, present, and future are all one, and that's why God knows the future, because he's eternal and exists outside of time. Now, if you exist without matter, that means you are immaterial. That means you can't be touched, you can't be seen, you can't be smelled or tasted. You are not made of matter. Now, if you exist without space, that means you are inspatial or omnipresent. You are everywhere. You're not bound by spatial restrictions. So, something, and we know this as a fact, because we know matter, time, and space were created, and the only thing that can create matter, time, and space is something that exists without matter, time, and space, because if it existed with matter, time, and space, then matter, time, and space wouldn't be created. So we know matter, time, and space were created by something that exists without matter, time, and space, and to exist without matter, time, and space means you are eternal, omnipresent, and immaterial, which are the very traits of God. So something that always existed, that is invisible and untouchable, that is everywhere, created matter, time, and space. What does that sound like to you?
Is the universe still expanding fast? I mean, is there a lot more room in space, as I think of it, for the universe to carry on getting bigger?
As far as I know, nothing in the way,
and it took me 5 minutes to show that it's still there.
The expansion continues. The question is whether there is sufficient matter in the universe, matter that we have not yet counted, that will slow the expansion down, stop it, and have the expanding universe followed by a collapsing universe, or whether there is not enough matter to stop the expansion, and so the expansion then continues forever. This is an observational question which is still unresolved, and the Hubble Space Telescope, which who knows might be launched next year if we're lucky.
Here you go. Look at this. Support mirror. They sent up a support balloon to resupply the mirror on a balloon. On a balloon, people. Look at this. Orion payload. Look at here. Inmarsat. You want to know where your satellite phone communications come from? A balloon, people. A balloon. I'll supply this document to whoever wants it. Here we go. Inmarsat test. Balloon. If you were to take time to search every single one of these flights to match it up with a particular rocket launch that they claim this thing was on, I guarantee you will be able to compare it with this Swedish Esran Space Center balloon flight list.
Might answer this question.
Professor Hawking uses a very striking metaphor of the Earth borrowing its energy from itself. Now, in straight banking terms, that means you're going to be overdrawn, and in the end there's going to be a collapse, a big crunch. So does Big Bang get followed inevitably by Big Crunch?
Okay, listen.
So does Big Bang get followed inevitably by Big Crunch?
No, not inevitably. It depends on how much matter there is in the universe, which is a still unsolved issue. I should say that the prevailing opinion is that the universe will continue expanding forever, but that, in my opinion, is by no means a very secure conclusion. But that, in my opinion, is by no means a very secure conclusion.
Well, let me bring in the poet amongst us here. Arthur Clarke, you know what T.S. Eliot said, this is the way the world ends, not with a bang but a whimper. When you think of the end of the world, if you think of the end of the world, does it end with a bang or a whimper?
Well, one would like to think that we will end with a bang. Of course, we'll never know. It's a rather a long way in the future. Some billions, tens of billions, possibly even much further in the future.
Billions of billions, billions of billions.
And as Carl said, we may have the answers to these questions in a very few years if the Hubble Space Telescope gets successfully into orbit and can peer out to the boundaries of the universe.
Are you able to obtain and view a real-time image of Hubble as it is right now, wherever it is?
No, we can't do that.
Or is there any other vehicle that can view Hubble in operation?
Not that I'm aware of.
Can I ask you how long you've been working on the team with the HST team?
I've been with HST over 25 years.
Now, have there been any real-time video, high-definition video images of Hubble at 330 miles or so?
Not that I'm aware of.
There are none?
Not that I'm aware of.
Wow. Yeah, so S&T wouldn't be able to tell me anything. I mean, you're the DMO, you're the DMOM.
And as Carl said, we may have the answers to these questions in a very few years if the Hubble Space Telescope gets successfully into orbit and can peer out to the boundaries of the universe.
When I put in the data for STS-31 on April 24th, 1990, nothing comes up. So I decided to use some other search query factors. I put in the crew members' names. Nothing comes up. I put in the STS mission number. Nothing comes up. So then I decided, okay, this falls under another category, and they have a list of category that describe, one or more astronauts traveling to a celestial body, one or more astronauts, the amount of time they spent in space, so on and so forth, durations. So I decided to click on the selection that says greatest mass lifted to greatest altitude. Okay, so I automatically and logically assumed that STS was one of the greatest mass, if not the greatest mass lifted to greatest altitude of 330 miles, and there's nothing in the database. So over a period of 4 months, I kept checking the database, and FAI actually they shut down the website and then updated their database. And I'm not sure if this was direct, but I had sent them an email saying, I'm looking for this particular mission on this particular date. Here goes the data. Is there a possibility that you have a problem updating your database? Could you please let me know or correct this? So a few days later, the website went down and it came back up. So I went searching for the data again. Now, I'm making a weekly habit of doing this. Checking, because maybe it's just some sort of database entry error that's common in just about every single local, national, international database with that type of error that may occur where maybe I'm not using the right search criteria. So I sent FAI.org an email asking them, could you please let me know if I'm not looking at this the right way? Could you locate this information in your database? They sent me back an email telling me, no, this was not registered in our database. No one filed an application for this to be put into the record book. So the conclusion I'm coming to is this. Is there a reason why NASA didn't put HST in the record books, but they put every servicing mission in the record books? Because every servicing mission is listed, but STS-31 on April 24, 1990 is not listed.
I can't speak to that, but obviously that's not a NASA database.
No, I do. I understand that, but again, I know it's not a database that NASA maintains in the database at all. So I please forgive me for saying this. Just please forgive me, and I don't want it to sound like some sort of crackpot idea or weird conspiracy, because that's not where I'm going with this. I have to say that I'm questioning that Hubble is even where they say it is. Because why wouldn't a $1.5 billion-dollar telescope, which is being used by every university around the world and every scientist who's involved in any kind of astrophysics, astrodynamics, just space exploration, period. If we're getting these images from Hubble and Sophia, which is a 747 special purpose, with the same exact technical specifications when it comes to the telescope, Sophia's taking the same exact pictures of Hubble. And that's where the disparity in image analysis comes in, because I have a half a dozen photos I took off from NASA's website for Hubble and Sophia, and when I ran them through MATLAB's image processing toolbox for comparative analysis, those images came from the same source. And it wasn't at 330 miles above the surface of the Earth. So that's
interesting.
That's where I'm trying to understand. You know, I'm mostly into IT, sir. That's what I do. I'm into information technology, security engineering, and database management. And I know NASA has a massive database. You guys got over a dozen supercomputers all around the country, all around the world that need to be managed just about by any and everybody. And their tasks are solely to keep the systems up to date and make sure they're operating efficiently and effectively, so that you can be able to go to your computer terminal and type up a query, and that information comes up literally in a nanosecond. That's how readily available it is. So my problem right now is that it makes no sense to me and why STS-31 is not in the database. And you confirm that you've worked for them for 25 years, and nobody sitting at Goddard who's on the Hubble team has ever seen Hubble in real time conducting any operations on the ground that could have been shot from another satellite asset with a high-definition camera and imaging to take a picture of Hubble.
If we are sort of living in a little suburb of the galaxy, can you foresee a time when we need to get out of the suburb and colonize somewhere else because of the gradual curve towards the end?
Well, I think the human race, if it survives the next few years, will go on to colonize first the solar system and then to send ships out to the stars and ultimately perhaps to other galaxies.
We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And this new system that we're building is going to allow us to go beyond and hopefully take humans into the solar system to explore. So the moon, Mars, asteroids, there's a lot of destinations that we could go to. And we're building these building block components in order to allow us to do that eventually.
But if the expansion of the universe is fast enough, we will never be able to keep up with it.
Now, one fascinating aspect that is raised is the question of time itself in the book. Now, we all think that we know what time is. It's a relentless march forward. But for the purposes of your argument, Stephen Hawking, you use a mathematical concept that you call imaginary time.
Imaginary time. Imaginary time. Wow! The land of make-believe!
Which seems to be able to run backwards as well as forwards.
In our theories, there are two kinds of time. There is what is called real time. This is a kind of time that is measured by a clock. The time that we feel passing, the time in which we grow older. Then there is imaginary time. Of course, imaginary time is an idea that science fiction writers, like Arthur, have used in their stories. But imaginary time is also a well-defined mathematical concept. It can be thought of as a direction of time that is at right angles to ordinary, real time, in a certain sense. The universe has a beginning in real time, at the Big Bang. And it may well have an end, if it collapses to a big crunch. But in imaginary time, it has no beginning or end. Rather, imaginary time is closed in on itself, like the surface of the Earth. The surface of the Earth doesn't have any beginning or end. The surface of the Earth doesn't have any beginning or end.
They had helped design the models, I'm sure, that Moody's used to rate the bonds. And I've spoken with people at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs who said we helped the ratings agencies understand these things.
They were the educators.
Yeah, they were the educators.
Wide Awake is at a camera height of 6.5 feet off of the water. I've included the coordinates as well. He's going to be looking at two different bird racks. Both racks are 16 feet tall. One is Cutter Rock, which was 11.05 miles away from the camera. The second is Billy Steele, which was 7.73 miles away. Here are the 3 points plotted as a triangle so you can roughly see the angle of observation. At a camera height of 6.5 feet, the horizon distance under the globe model would have to be under 3 miles away. 3.1 miles is assuming a perfectly flat glass-like globe without waves and swells. In other words, 3.1 miles is the maximum distance to the physical barrier horizon under the globe model. We're going to see repeated observations demonstrating that there is no truth to the globe horizon distance whatsoever. At a distance of 7.73 miles, Billy Steele should have only 2 feet visible. But again, that's assuming this perfectly glass-like still water. In fact, it shouldn't have been visible at all due to the waves. In contrast, Cutter Rock at 11.05 miles should have been entirely hidden. The top of Cutter Rock should have been 26 feet below the globe horizon line. Here, you can see Cutter Rock is not hidden behind a wall of water. That's a big problem for the globe, but I'm more interested in the horizon distance for this video. The horizon should have only been 3.1 miles away. Instead, the horizon is further than 11.05 miles. We're going to fast forward a bit to get to the next amazing clip that destroys the globe. We have Billy Steele on the left and Cutter Rock on the right. Note the distances, 7.73 miles and 11.05 miles respectively. The most obvious issue for the globe is that there should be a wall of water hiding the racks. Clearly, there is no bulge of water. But the globe, physical horizon, should only be 3.1 miles away maximum. Now, there are plenty of calculators online to help you figure it out yourself. Without question, the horizon here is much further and is beyond 11.05 miles. Under the globe model, that would mean that refraction somehow caused the wall of water to disappear in front of the racks and then reappear much further behind the racks. But this wizard-like refraction somehow left the racks in place. There's simply no possible way that refraction could do this and separate the water from the racks. But let's look closer. Under the globe model, Billy Steele should have dropped 39.8 feet from the observer's point of view. That's taking the distance in miles, squaring it, and then multiplying by 8 inches. On the other hand, Cutter Rock should have dropped a whopping 81.4 feet. In other words, Cutter Rock should have dropped over 40 feet more than Billy Steele. But Cutter Rock did not drop. In fact, it's higher prospectively as we would expect on a flat plane. Here, I've leveled out the still photo and added a line for the horizon. You can see that Cutter Rock is higher prospectively because the base of Cutter Rock is higher than the base of Billy Steele. How could this indiscernible wrap-around-a-ball refraction cause Cutter Rock to appear higher prospectively?
Imaginary time.
Do you see how this photo obliterates the globe model? The globe propagandist would want you to believe that refraction removed the wall of water in front of the racks, caused the horizon to then reappear many miles further than it should, did not touch the racks in between the disappearing and reappearing horizon, and then raised Cutter Rock prospectively over Billy Steele to match a flat Earth.
A wizard did it.
When you come to think about it, I think that a wizard did it seems more plausible than this magical refraction nonsense. And this isn't an aberration. I can give you many more examples, but I'll try to keep this short. This footage is from BMLS-B69. At his camera elevation of 105 feet, the horizon could not have been further than 12.6 miles from the camera. In this case, the horizon line is beyond 26.4 miles. So, again, the globe propagandists would want you to believe that the horizon line and the wall of water disappeared in front of the oil platforms and then reappeared many miles beyond the platforms while leaving the platforms at varying distances intact. These are the same globe problems as we had with Wide Awake's footage. The magical disappearing and reappearing horizon act that leaves objects alone. For brevity, I'm going to provide one more example.
The surface of the Earth doesn't have any beginning or end.
This is another video by BMLS-B69. He brings down his camera to just 1 foot off of the water. At 1 foot, the horizon could not be further than 1.2 miles away. But these two platforms are 6.2 miles and 9.41 miles away from the observer. And the horizon is much further than 9.41 miles. Do you really believe that the globe wall of water forming a horizon disappeared and reappeared many miles beyond where it's supposed to be, while leaving the two platforms untouched by this disappearing refraction? In addition, the 9.41 mile platform is prospectively higher, again matching the flat Earth argument that the horizon is a matter of perspective and not a globe physical barrier. I could give you several more distance to the horizon examples just for my channel, but this video is already too long and I have proven my point. Of course, the globe wizards will argue that magical refraction is responsible for these repeated disappearing and reappearing horizon tricks, but it only takes a modicum of common sense to see that the globe propagandists are rotten no good deceivers.
And it took me 5 minutes to show that it's still there.
I know, because I have been round the world, and I didn't fall off. Individual particles can travel through imaginary time and arrive back at an earlier real time. But I don't believe that people will ever be able to travel back in time, like in the film Back to the Future.
I'm going to come first. If I may, to you, Carl Sagan, because this idea in Professor Hawking's book...
Your book's turned me on when I was a small boy.
This extraordinary four-dimensional model of the universe with no boundaries, but finite, just like the Earth. This, to me, is really stretching my own capacity for imagination to the utmost. How would you turn it into words for me, a layman?
Well, the first thing I would say is not to feel bad if it's not immediately intuitively obvious. Our ability to understand things instantly, so-called common sense, derives from a certain range of size and speed and duration that are appropriate for human existence. We know about things from 1/10 of a millimeter to a few kilometers, from a fraction of a second to a lifetime, and so on. So when we are dealing with matters of quantum physics, where particles have a size of 10 to the minus 13th centimeters,
but everything now is based upon Greek atomism. That's all general relativity and quantum mechanics are, is nothing other than atomism. If you don't know what atomism is, then I suggest you look it up. It basically means that the whole universe is just a giant bag of magical, unseen particles rolling around like BBs and volleyballs.
Or in cosmology, where we are talking about...
There is a crisis in cosmology. Usually in science, if we're off by a factor of 2 or a factor of 10, we call that horrible. We say something's wrong with the theory. We're off by a factor of 10. However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120. That is 1 with 120 zeros after it. Say what? This is the largest mismatch between theory and experiment in the history of science.
Or in cosmology, where we are talking about 10 billion light years or more.
10 to the 120.
It is very reasonable that our intuition is not adequate to the task. One point I'd like to make about this is that every human culture has a set of creation myths, but they're in the realm of mythology or religion or folklore, and they are, of course, all mutually inconsistent. The great thing that is happening in our time is that we are able, through a method which can actually make some progress towards the real universe out there,
imaginary time,
to find out something about origins, and this is the scientific method applied to the science of cosmology. So I know that's not a direct answer to your question, but I thought it was more important to address the issue of feeling unhappy because it wasn't immediately understandable.
Well, yes, I find that extremely soothing, actually, because it is a kind of sort of formidable task of grasping this. It makes me want to retreat into trivial questions like, is this idea of predicting backwards going to put astrologers out of business?
Nothing will put astrologers out of business.
Well, alas. Well, that certainly added a touch of lightness to these tremendous issues that we are discussing: infinity, black holes, and imaginary time. And at this stage, let's relax a little bit and have a bit of fun with mathematics at their most abstruse. I'm going to ask Arthur Clarke here to do some doodling with his computer and with a fascinating exercise with complex numbers, which is called the Mandelbrot set. Now, this is named in honor of a French scientist working for IBM. It's a mathematical equation which leads us towards the infinite. In effect, it makes the mathematics of the universe visual and incredibly beautiful. This is what we would see if we had eyes to see it, when order meets chaos.
In some ways, fractal geometry is a rebellion against calculus, whose central assumption is that things tend to look smooth if you zoom in far enough. But Mandelbrot saw this as overly idealized, or at least needlessly idealized, resulting in models that neglect the finer details of the thing that they're actually modeling, which can matter. What he observed is that self-similar shapes give a basis for modeling the regularity in some forms of roughness, but the popular perception that fractals only include perfectly self-similar shapes is another over-idealization, one that ironically goes against the pragmatic spirit of fractal geometry's origins.
This is what's going on in the universe every day. An ordered universe is breaking down and becoming more disordered. This is the second law of thermodynamics in action, what Stephen Hawking calls Murphy's Law.
I will also be talking about the reciprocal nature of space and counter space. Some people out there are trying to say that Ken Wheeler is wrong and that there is no reciprocation within the magnet. Well, the math says otherwise, and therefore I believe that there is reciprocation between space and counter space. The reciprocation between space and counter space is the cause of energy flow. Yes, I agree that everything is energy flow, but what is the root cause of energy flow? I say the main cause of energy flow is reciprocation between space and counter space. Scientifically speaking, of course.
Now, Dr. Clarke, you've been using your computer back home in Sri Lanka to explore the Mandelbrot set at incredibly high magnifications. Over to you, sir.
Yes, well, this strange-looking object is the Mandelbrot set, which actually is extraordinarily simple in concept. It's defined by an equation of just two terms, z squared plus c. That's all there is to it. Yeah, that simple equation, z squared or z squared plus c, you feed a number into it, then carry on over and over again, sort of cranking the number back round and round, and then plot the result on the screen. So I won't go into details, but this is the first appearance of this set. And what it does, it divides all possible numbers into two categories. It's really a map or a boundary or a fence, if you like, dividing one class of numbers from another. And you can tell your computer to go into any spot here and say, recompute that area to a higher degree of precision, and then blow it up on the screen. So you can use the computer as a microscope, and you can continue that process forever. Some of the images are incredibly beautiful and are going to have a great impact on artistic design in the next decade or so. I found what looked like black holes, and I'd like to show them to you. So what I'm going to do now, essentially, is to zoom into it, increasing the magnification manyfold, and if I press the right button, it should happen now. The computer will now give you this image, and I think you'll agree when it comes up, it's a very impressive black hole, and it'll be even more so when I start it into action.
Oh yes, it is magnificent, isn't it?
You ain't seen nothing yet. I should explain that this magnification, you remember the original picture which it took about the same area, this time I've magnified it about 1,000 times, so the picture you saw first is now 500 feet across. Now let's see if this works. Now isn't that lovely?
I think when I first heard someone reference fractional dimension like this, I just thought it was nonsense, right? I mean, mathematicians are clearly just making stuff up. Dimension is something that usually only makes sense for natural numbers, right? A line is one-dimensional, a plane, that's two-dimensional, the space that we live in, that's three-dimensional, and so on. And in fact, any linear algebra student who just learned the formal definition of dimension in that context would agree it only makes sense for counting numbers. And of course, the idea of fractal dimension is just made up. I mean, this is math, everything's made up.
This is math, everything's made up.
But the question is whether or not it turns out to be a useful construct for modeling the world.
So there's matter streaming into this black hole. Well, now, when I found this black hole, I started exploring the neighborhood, and I very quickly found another.
Indeed.
Now that's
lovely.
Now this is the second black hole. Now it looks just like the earlier one, but this is on a far greater magnification. The original Mandelbrot set now is, I think, about 10 million miles wide. This is enormously bigger than the first one you saw, yet essentially it's the same kind of pattern. This is black hole number 3, and this one took me 22 hours of computing the day before I left Sri Lanka. I had the computer running all night, and I'm rather proud of this one because on this scale, that original little picture you saw is the width of the orbit of Mars. So you understand that no human being has ever seen that particular pattern before, simply because of probabilities. And you can explore the Mandelbrot set by blowing up bits and pieces of it, and you can be pretty sure that no one's ever seen that. You're the first person to see it.
And each time you're being drawn towards...
You're being sucked into it.
Mathematical infinity.
Into smaller and... Yes, this is real mathematical infinity. This goes on forever and ever.
Imaginary time.
Limited only by the capacity of your machine and the speed with which it can do its calculations. I am doing calculations here. You may not be able to see that enormously long number, the 20-digit numbers or so, and the machine is multiplying those together hundreds of times a second. Now, the thing that fascinates me about this is that it is infinite in detail. You can go on forever and ever. Now, I would like to ask Stephen this question. Is the real universe also infinite in detail? I mean, we know we have molecules, atoms, electrons, protons, subatomic, right down to the quarks so far. But does it continue forever and ever? Or is there a limit? Is there a basement to the real universe?
Professor Hawking.
We will discover new structures when look at the universe on smaller and smaller scales. But in the case of the universe, there seems to be a limiting scale. It is called a Planck length, and is about 1,000,000 billion times smaller than an inch. This means that there is a limit to how complex the universe can be. It also means that the universe could be described by a theory that is fairly simple, at least on scales of the Planck length.
Space cannot exist without counterspace, and counterspace cannot be intuited without space. Both must exist for either to exist. This is the principle of incommensurability. Thus, the principle of incommensurability states the following. Incommensurate domains exist in nature. Incommensurate domains act or operate as if joined. Domain separators exhibit the property of self-similarity. In other words, they are fractal. This last one is new. This is my contribution to Ken Wheeler's Missing Secrets of Magnetism. In the previous video, I talked about how I came to understand the principle of incommensurability and indirectly the concepts of space and counterspace via the mathematical fractal called the Mandelbrot set. I will be using this as a teaching tool to help you understand and visualize these concepts. If you read my paper, The Mandelbrot Set as a Quasi-Black Hole, which will be linked in the description below, you will find that the black region of the Mandelbrot set are the points whose trajectories contract counterspatially when iterated through the function z equals z squared plus c. The black region of the Mandelbrot set, therefore, corresponds to the domain of counterspace. The outer gradient region are the points whose trajectories expand spatially, therefore, the outer gradient region corresponds to the domain of space. The Mandelbrot set, therefore, can be considered as a graph of the domains of space and counterspace. The fuzzy boundary that separates space and counterspace can be considered as a domain separator. It separates the domain of space from the domain of counterspace. In the model I'm proposing, all domain separators have the property of self-similarity, and therefore they are fractal in nature. Thus, self-similarity is an emergent property of the principle of incommensurability. In the case of the Mandelbrot set, all the pretty Mandelbrot set images that you can find on the internet all come from the region or domain separator. Domain separators are emergent properties of the interaction between space and counterspace. The domain of counterspace manifests in many ways. Next, I'm going to show you how I plan on unifying physics using the principle of incommensurability. Instead of unifying forces, what we're going to do instead is unify scales. Both space and counterspace can appear at many scales. So here's how I plan on unifying physics. Here is the first scale of unification. Dark matter corresponds to the domain of counterspace. Dark energy corresponds to the domain of space. Dark matter is counterspatial contraction, and dark energy is spatial expansion. The domain separator of dark matter and dark energy corresponds to the observable universe. The observable universe, therefore, is an emergent property of the interaction between space and counterspace. Now we're going to look at another scale of organized matter, the black hole. Here, the black hole corresponds to the domain of counterspace. The not well-known photon sphere corresponds to the domain of space. The black hole can be thought of as counterspatial contraction, and the photon sphere can be thought of as spatial expansion. The domain separator in this case is the event horizon. The event horizon is an emergent property of the interaction between space and counterspace. Now we're going to move to the atomic scale. Here, the nucleus of the atom, i.e. the strong force, corresponds to the domain of counter space. The electron shells correspond to the domain of space. And the weak force plays the role of the domain separator. The domain of the weak force in the atom exactly separates space from counter space. As the weak force can bring things together, i.e. fusion, it can also tear things apart, i.e. fission. The poorly named weak force is an emergent property of the interaction between space and counter space. Here I would like to point out that the gradient region in the spatial domain of the Mandelbrot set is quantized. The electron shells within the atom are also thought to be quantized. In chaos theory, phase transitions are always quantized, that is, they appear suddenly without warning. The implication here is that the electron transitions are phase transitions, and this is why they are quantized. In other words, photons are not quantized, electron transitions are quantized within the atom. In short, the atom encapsulates all the features of the principle of incommensurability. That is, it has a counterspatial domain, it has a spatial domain, and it has a domain separator that has interesting behavior. So, here is a summary of my unification based on the principle of incommensurability and the self-similar nature of the universe. In future videos, I will show you more ways to apply the principle of incommensurability to physics, biology, and to nature in general. I will also be talking about the reciprocal nature of space and counter space. Some people out there are trying to say that Ken Wheeler is wrong and that there is no reciprocation within the magnet. Well, the math says otherwise, and therefore I believe that there is reciprocation between space and counter space. The reciprocation between space and counter space is the cause of energy flow. Yes, I agree that everything is energy flow, but what is the root cause of energy flow? I say the main cause of energy flow is reciprocation between space and counter space. Scientifically speaking, of course.
I just hope that we are smart enough to find it.
Are we smart enough to find it, Arthur?
Well, I wonder, because after all we're still pretty primitive organisms and the universe is very old, and I just don't know. I would like to think so, but then there's a feeling, when we found it, then what? Where do we go from here?
I'd like to turn our attention back now to Professor Stephen Hawking. Do you think that we could ever hope to use the old science fiction trick of diving into a black hole and then traveling to another part of the cosmos? Science fiction trick, science fiction trick.
Some recent work indicates that particles that fall into a black hole can come out again from another black hole somewhere else in the universe. At first sight, this seems the ideal method of space travel. Just find a black hole and jump in it.
Oh no! I gotta take it away before more clueless kids fall into it. Geronimo!
But there are snags. First, there doesn't seem to be any way to choose where you come out. Worse than that, your history in real time would come to a sticky end as you were torn apart by the gravitational fields inside the black hole. No! Your history in imaginary time would continue out of the other black hole. But that might not be much consolation to someone being made into spaghetti.
Dad, don't pat it!
Why should that? What are you little? So how do you see the actual role of science fiction? Is it purely escapism, or do you see it as having a very real purpose in broadening our patterns of thinking, opening our minds to the kind of vast concepts which we're discussing today?
Well, first of all, there's no real objection to escapism in the right places. In fact, C.S. Lewis once remarked to me, the only people who object to escapism are jailers. And we all want to escape occasionally, but science fiction is often very far from escapism. In fact, you might say that science fiction is escape into reality. Science fiction is escape into reality. It's a fiction which does concern itself with real issues. Concern itself with real issues.
And it took me 5 minutes to show that it's still there.
Real issues. The origin of man, our future. In fact, I cannot think of any form of literature which is more concerned with real issues, reality.
Well, what do you have to say to that, Professor Hawking?
I don't believe in stories of flying saucers and other unidentified flying objects. If time travel were possible, we should have already been visited by people from the future. I think if we were being visited by people from another time or another planet, it would be much more obvious and probably very unpleasant. I don't want to make contact with another civilization, except at a safe distance. It might be like the North American Indians making contact with the white men. I bet they wish they had never sold Manhattan.
I'll bet they did now. Carl, you are the world's leading expert in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Now, Professor Hawking doesn't want to make contact with them. Why do you want to make contact with them?
Well, first off, I would say we have little choice in the matter. We have little choice in the matter.
As part of spreading the deception, we know that the Vatican is preparing for the arrival of aliens. We have someone who goes by the name of Father Giuseppe Tanzanella Nitti. He is also a professor at the Vatican University, and he is quoted as saying very soon, we will not have to deny our Christian faith, but there is information coming from another world, and once it is confirmed, it is going to require a rereading of the gospel as we know it. So can you see what he is saying here? Basically, they're saying that information is coming from another world very soon. They are preparing the masses for this alien savior that is coming. I'm sure many of you have heard of Guy Consolmagno, who is part of the Lucifer Telescope Project and is also a Jesuit Vatican astronomer, and he is quoted as saying he's going to baptize aliens. Even Pope Francis is quoted as saying that. So I believe the Roman Catholic Church, the Vatican, is very much preparing people for something, and the fact that Stephen Hawking is a lifetime member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, could it be that he is just playing a role as to, you know, preparing the masses for what is definitely coming, the arrival of an alien savior?
We have little choice in the matter. That is, we have already announced, or rather I should say, Magnus, you fellows have already announced the fact that there is a low-level technical civilization in this part of the galaxy, because television programs get out at the speed of light.
Path loss, or path attenuation, is the reduction in power density attenuation of an electromagnetic wave as it propagates through space. Path loss is a major component in the analysis and design of the link budget of a telecommunication system. This term is commonly used in wireless communications and signal propagation. Path loss may be due to many effects, such as free space loss, refraction, diffraction, reflection, aperture medium coupling loss, and absorption. Path loss is also influenced by terrain contours, environment, urban or rural, vegetation and foliage, propagation medium, dry or moist air, the distance between the transmitter and the receiver, and the height and location of antennas. Path loss normally includes propagation losses caused by the natural expansion of the radio wave front in free space, which usually takes the shape of an ever-increasing sphere. Absorption losses, sometimes called penetration losses, when the signal passes through media not transparent to electromagnetic waves. Diffraction losses when part of the radio wave front is obstructed by an opaque obstacle, and losses caused by other phenomena.
Because television programs get out.
What kind of wattage? Now remember, I gave NASA all the benefit of the doubt. I said they were using 2 kilowatts, if I remember, of power. And I didn't knock off anything for the air conditioning, for the pressurization of the LEM that had to be constantly going. Anything else? No loss, of course, and the wires going out and different things like that. I gave them the whole 2 kilowatts, the broadcast, or whatever their kilowatts was. I gave it to them. To say it's 5, I think he gives them 5 kilowatts. Well, when you do the distance and put it in, this is what you end up with. What do we got here? Hundreds, 100,000. This 5 here is the 5 millionth place. Okay? Millionth place. 5 million right there. So, 63 billion watts would be necessary to transmit that distance to the Earth. 63 billion watts.
Because television programs get out, and since any other civilization who detects those signals is unlikely to be at or before our state of technological advance, since we've just invented radio technology, so to say, they are much more likely to be in our technological future. And the question as to whether their intentions are benign or otherwise is, of course, of interest, but we have nothing to say about the matter. So therefore, I think we might as well hope that it's benign if they're out there. From my point of view, the search for extraterrestrial life, and especially the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, is one of the key philosophical, scientific, and human questions that have been posed. But we are at the very beginning of searching. Surely it is important for us to know the answer.
One thing that interests me a great deal is the way in which the public perception of beings from outer space have changed over the years. They used to be the baddies, but now there's a sort of optimistic feeling that any extraterrestrial life is, if not benign, is at least not as hostile and aggressive as one used to fear. Is this the drift of your writing as well, Arthur? Your thinking?
Yes, I'm an optimist, and I believe that any malevolent super-civilization would rapidly self-destruct, as we may be in the process of doing ourselves. So if we do have contact, physical contact with aliens,
physical contact. Physical contact. Physical contact.
physical contact with aliens, I think it will be benign.
My frivolous mind is much taken.
Very intelligent beings reasonably near. Why have they not visited us?
Well, that's a very good question. Let's throw it right across to Arthur Clarke.
There are literally dozens of answers to this. They may have come in the remote past. They may be visiting us every 10,000 years. I mean, the universe is a huge place, and even if there are fleets of survey ships going all over the cosmos, we shouldn't expect visitors less than, I'd say, every 1,000 years or so. They may know all about us, and they may have put a quarantine around our planet for pretty good reasons. They may be totally uninterested in us. They may be so much higher that they, we're just beneath contempt, if you like. You can speculate endlessly. I think we should just wait and try and get more evidence.
Maybe their space probes are saying there's no intelligent life on Earth.
They may have received our television programs and decided that that is the case.
May I attempt a different answer to Stephen's question?
Please do, Carl Sagan.
The first large-scale commercial broadcasting on the Earth was in the late 1940s. So that's what, 40 years ago. So you must imagine. A spherical wave expanding out from the Earth at the velocity of light, which contains all the dreary programs of the late 1940s.
63 billion watts.
Since then, that expanding spherical wave containing the news of a developing civilization on Earth has traveled some 40 light years. Suppose that there are no civilizations closer than 40 light years. Perhaps they're not here because they don't know we are about just yet. But in time, the message gets to them. And perhaps they send a little expedition to look us over.
I was delighted when I read that when space probes went out, first of all, you put the figure of a man and a woman on the outside so that any alien life would recognize what we looked like. And then in a latest probe, I think you put in an LP of Earth sounds with instructions in hand signals on how to work the LP. How do you think anybody would have reacted if, in fact, alien intelligence had heard this LP?
Here's the other very strange thing about this satellite, is they claim that it's not being used by NASA, but it is still being used by the Antarctic mission. The Palmer Station in Antarctica currently uses this satellite from 1967. And you can see here, they say this satellite is now still being used for order wire voice, this is one of the services, public telephone, and point-to-point data transfer, remote hosts / internet access. What in the world are people thinking? This satellite was launched in 1967. The internet was not even... No, I'm sorry, 1967 technology does not enable you to use the internet 34 years later. That is just ridiculous. That is a Santa Claus story. That is a pink unicorn on a rainbow story. They're claiming that they're using the internet on a satellite, from a satellite that was launched in 1967 and was decommissioned by NASA. They quit using it in 2001. Yeah, that is just insane. I don't even know what to say about that. It's just ridiculous. So you can see right here, they say they get 2 hours minimum per day contact with this satellite. Link quality, port affair, variable due to the ionosphere. Let's look at the comments. Shared with South Pole and LMG, problems with multipath signals from the ocean, and the ionospheric disruptions to signal. Yeah, to the balloon, I guess. You're talking about the balloons you launch all the time.
My guess is that it'd be something like, oh, look, another artifact from some extremely primitive civilization. Which one is this? 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 But then some degree of thanks that we were thoughtful enough to send a message into the far future, which could in no way benefit us. Certainly a selfless act. And perhaps it would be recognized as a hopeful and optimistic gesture by an emerging civilization just setting foot into the great galactic wilderness.
Yes, Arthur.
I know what is going to happen to your voyagers, Carl. They'll be overtaken one day by a terrestrial spaceship and brought back to the Smithsonian.
It's certainly technologically possible, but I hope they let it go on its original mission. Let it go on its original mission. Let it go on its original mission.
It's very nearly 20 years ago since man landed on the moon.
This famous shot is filled with anomalies, including tracks on the moon's surface. You can see the antenna on top of the crosshair, and the crosshair is etched into the camera. It couldn't be there. And just above this crosshair, the picture is airbrushed out. This famous rock has a Roman numeral C on it. Could not happen. And it also appears to be sculpted or paper mache'd. How can you have a round rock where there's no atmosphere, wind, rain to round that rock?
Do you think that we've basically stopped trying to get man any further? Is there any chance that another Neil Armstrong will set foot on Mars in our lifetime?
We only can fly in Earth orbit. That's the farthest that we can go. And
the United States and the Soviet Union have managed to booby-trap the planet with about 60,000 nuclear weapons.
Oh, Dad! Dana, where are you going? I'm setting booby traps. Booby traps. That's what I said, Sam. Setting booby traps.
Booby trap.
In case of anybody's following us. Like if we tell us so we can hear them coming.
Okay, hurry up.
Good idea. Hey, Dana, where are you going? I'm setting booby traps.
You mean booby traps?
That's what I said, booby traps.
Booby trap.
Quiet. Shh. God, these guys.
With a little help from Britain, France, China, and Israel. A tiny fraction of those weapons is enough to destroy the participating nations, certainly, the global civilization possibly, and the human species just maybe. Booby trap.
That's what I said, booby traps.
Booby trap.
Booby traps. That's what I said, Sam. Setting booby traps.
It is now time for the United States and the Soviet Union to demonstrate that they can undo this specter, that they can demonstrate their ability to work together on high technology for peaceful, hopeful purposes that carry us into a benign 21st century.
Now a look at a moment when national security interests trumped ethical concerns. Jeffrey Brown has our book conversation.
Nazi scientists, some of them tied to war crimes, including horrific concentration camp experiments, brought to the U.S. in a secret program to advance American security interests during the Cold War. It sounds like the plot of a film drama, but it actually happened, and on a large scale. The story is told in the new book, Operation Paperclip. Author and journalist Annie Jacobson joins us now. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
Many of the things that seem impossible now will become realities tomorrow.
And that is why I support the idea of joint U.S.-Soviet cooperation in the exploration of Mars, leading up to an international manned, and by the way, womaned mission to the planet.
They docked again.
Oh no. It looked like it was docking, but then it started to fall off.
Apollo Houston, it was a beautiful docking. We had a good picture. We can see Italy coming up in the Mediterranean right now.
Oh, never mind. I guess it's all good now. So we can watch more of these miniature models in a black warehouse. Or do some of you still believe in magic? Do you really believe this is in space? Do you trust these men that much?
After some 3 hours, the two spacecraft separate for the last time, and Apollo maneuvers into position for the final joint experiment.
And that is why I support the idea of joint U.S.-Soviet cooperation.
Wait a second. Why does the craft easing away look identical to the craft arriving earlier? Well, that's easy. Put them together, and it's clear. They're just playing the miniature model video in reverse. You can even see where the Earth goes in one direction, and then it is simply played in reverse and the Earth goes the other way. These kind of tricks worked in the 70s. Now why do we still allow them today? Why can't we call out fake what is clearly fake? Why are we so afraid of what others think when you can just watch what they are showing you and clearly say fake?
And you can see on the back of his shirt a couple of upticks on either side.
Americans and Soviets, as representatives of the human species, other nations, I presume, would also be involved. And then a glorious, whatever it would be, few-month period in which Mars, I have a globe of it right next to me, in which Mars would be explored. There are hundreds, for example, hundreds of ancient river valleys on Mars. Mars is today bone dry. It was once much warmer, much wetter, much denser atmosphere, much more Earth-like. Earth-like.
Hidden in Greenland? Let's do some Luciferian color theory.
Earth-like. 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 What were those conditions like? Why did an Earth-like planet get converted into this deep ice age condition that Mars has today? And is there life there? Could there once have been life? Are there fossil forms? There are extraordinary, enigmatic geological features on the planet. What is their nature? There's a huge amount of exploration to do. And all of it, every step that I've described, could be before the television cameras of the world. and we could all participate in such exploration.
Is not a danger that the human bits that we take with us will pollute and destroy something enormously precious out there simply because we're so inquisitive about it? Arthur.
Well, as to the question, should human beings go to the other planets, I think the answer to that is, well, we could have stayed in Europe and explored America by robots. It might have been, it certainly saved a lot of human lives, but of course we didn't. We went there and lived in this new continent. Now, admittedly, Mars, in fact, none of the planets in the solar system is anything like as benign as the United States or the other parts of this planet. But one day, people are going to call them home.
People are going to call them home.
There will be Martians one day, and they'll be our great-grandchildren, and they'll think Earth probably is a horrible place in which to live. There will be Martians one day.
Hey, you want to buy some stuff, man, huh?
Strap yourselves in. We're going to Mars.
Hey, you want to buy some stuff, man, huh?
Strap yourselves in. We're going to Mars. Not just a few astronauts, thousands of people are going to colonize Mars. And I am telling you that they're going to do this soon. Some of you will end up working on projects on Mars, and I guarantee that some of your children will end up living there.
And they'll be our great-grandchildren, and they'll think Earth probably is a horrible place.
And I guarantee that some of your children will end up living there. That probably sounds preposterous. But first, I want to discuss the obvious question.
Can we trust you guys?
Why the heck should we do this?
Too cool for Cocoa Puffs. You think you're spinning and there's space, moron. I got more brains in my fucking fingernail than you, because you think we're spinning and there's space. Done!
A single large asteroid could take us out forever.
You don't know science. You think you're spinning.
Think what a tragedy it would be.
You think you're spinning! You think you can go to space and land on a light!
We are incredibly vulnerable to the whims of our own galaxy. To survive, we have to reach beyond the home planet.
It feels good to be smarter than all you dumb motherfuckers. It feels good that I'm not dumb and you are.
Think what a tragedy it would be if all that humans have accomplished were suddenly obliterated. And there's another reason we should go.
That's how dumb you are!
Our DNA.
But yet, you're out there fucking spouting your fucking ignorance.
2 million years ago, humans evolved in Africa.
That's how dumb you are!
Yes, we could do a lot of good with the money it will take to establish a thriving colony on Mars. And yes, we should all be taking far better care of our own home planet. And yes, I worry we could screw up Mars the way we've screwed up Earth.
That's how dumb you are!
Now, as to whether we will pollute these environments, yes, to some extent. Of course, colonization always involves the destruction of what was there first. And I'm quite sure in the next century, in fact, already it started. There's a conference on the pollution of space planned in the United States in the very near future. This is already a serious problem in near Earth space.
That's how dumb you are!
Kennedy told us we would put a human on the moon. He excited an entire generation to dream. Think how inspired we will be to see a landing on Mars.
You think you're spinning! You think you can go to space and land on a light!
Perhaps then we will look back at Earth and see that that is one people instead of many, and perhaps then we will look back at Earth as we struggle to survive on Mars and realize how precious the home planet is.
Fuck you! You're gonna be a traitor when you do that.
So, let me tell you about the extraordinary adventure we're about to undertake.
Can we trust you guys?
Mars is not our sister planet.
This guy.
The surface area of Mars that you can stand on, the Earth that you can stand on,
this guy.
100 times thinner than on Earth, and it's not breathable. It's 96% carbon dioxide.
This motherfucking moron, dude.
The average temperature is minus 81 degrees, although there is quite a range of temperature. And for anybody who wants to strap on some wings and go flying one day, and it's the kind of place where you could jump over your car instead of walk around it. By far the most livable other place in our entire solar system.
But we have to control it. I mean, you have to cut down forests on this Earth to make new cities, and on the moon, I'm afraid one day we may have to abolish much of the lunar vacuum, and on Mars we may have to change the atmosphere. But I do hope we will leave bits of the universe in a pristine condition.
But are we also going to have to change ourselves on Mars? I mean, are we going to have to evolve differently?
Mars will change us. In fact, this is part of the evolutionary progress. By going out into new environments, by occupying new biological niches, that is the way we progress and discover the universe and explore and perhaps fulfill our destiny.
Mars is a long way away. 1,000 times farther away from us than our own moon. Mars is a long way away, 1,000 times farther away from us than our own moon. Mars is 250 million miles away, and it will take us 8 months to get there, 240 days. Mars is 250 million miles away, and it will take us 8 months to get there, 240 days.
This is not my editing. He really said that. He messed up.
When Mars and the Earth are just aligned just so the distance that the rocket would have to travel will be the shortest. 240 days is a long time to spend trapped with your colleagues in a tin can. So, getting to Mars is not going to be easy, and that brings up a really interesting question. How soon will the first humans actually land here? Now, if we got there by 2050, that'd be a pretty good achievement. These days, NASA seems to be saying that it can get humans to Mars by 2040. But frankly, I don't think they're going to bother in 2035 to send a rocket to Mars. We're going to land in Mars in 2027. And the reason is this man is determined to make that happen. His name is Elon Musk. He's the CEO of Tesla Motors and SpaceX. Now, he actually told me that we would land on Mars by 2025. Still, you got to ask yourself, can this guy really do this? Governments and robots no longer control this game, are leaping into space, and they will be happy to take you to Mars. And that raises a really big question. Can we actually live there? Now, NASA may not be able to get us there. Here's what you need to live on Earth, or we may get there a long time before NASA. And here's what you need to live on Mars. All of the above, plus oxygen. Most of it's underground. It takes a lot of energy to get it and a lot of human labor. This is a device cooked up at the University of Washington back in 1998. This device can extract all the water that humans will need simply from the atmosphere on Mars. This machine, MOXIE, I love this thing. It's a reverse fuel cell, essentially, that sucks in the Martian atmosphere and pumps out oxygen. On Mars, there's hardly any atmospheric pressure. So Davin Newman, a scientist at MIT, has created this sleek spacesuit. It will keep us together, block radiation, and keep us warm. is perfect for making bricks. And NASA has figured this one out too. They're going to throw some polymer plastic into the bricks, shove them in a microwave oven, and then you will be able to build buildings with really thick walls. Or we may choose to live underground in caves or in lava tubes. We can do this. We really can, in living the good life on Mars. Or we may choose to live underground in caves or in lava tubes. But it's still a little complicated and a little difficult. So that leads to the next big, really big step in living the good life on Mars, and that's terraforming the planet.
Now, you guys may think this is a joke, and it is, but the joke's on us. They're serious about it. They plan to do this, and they're going to have your children living in caves.
Making it more like Earth, re-engineering an entire planet.
I think that they plan to do a reset, and they're going to have this colony of primitives living in caves in Antarctica underground, and they're going to geoengineer the enclosed Earth with chemtrails, and then they're going to tell people that they live on Mars and that Earth is the light in the sky. They'll say, oh, look in the sky. Where's the red planet? Oh, there, you don't see the red planet because it's orange. They'll say, oh, you're standing on the red planet. You've already started to hear it, and they're going to try to make it so that all of civilization believes that they live on Mars when actually they're on Earth, and they just reemerge after everything on the 6 continents that we live on is destroyed, and they come back from the outer rim. And like I said, you think it's a joke. It's not a joke. Look at the flag of Mars. Do you see the flag of Mars here? Look at the colors from left to right. You have red. I don't know why they call it the red planet, because it's orange, but they have it, and it's red, and then it's going to be terraformed, right? And then it'll be green because they'll start to grow stuff on it. Because then it's blue because they're going to, quote, melt the ice into water. It's really just going to be Antarctica. They already know they can do this on Antarctica. That's why nobody's allowed there. It's going to be the future civilization. And God help us, you know, here on the 6 continents of Earth, because they're just going to use some kind of technology like the fasces, you know, this resonant wave technology, and just mud flood and wipe us out, man. That's their plan.
That sounds like a lot of hubris, but the truth is that the technology to do everything I'm about to tell you already exists.
You think it's a joke. It's not a joke. Serious. This guy's up here spouting this crap. It's total crap. This is the top TED Talks, you know, this is top science. These are scientists saying this stuff. It's not a joke. Elon Musk, the top character, billionaire that they propped up, the people in control, this is what they're doing. Wake up. You know how they've been hinting that Mars has some ancient civilization. You know, they just hint at these ideas. You can tell. That ancient civilization is us. When they discover the remains of our buildings and things like that, we'll be the Martians. We'll be the ancient civilization that they kind of dig out and wonder about.
Here's the problem.
You think you're spinning! You think you can go to space and land on a light!
I think de-evolution is making us so stupid that we just believe the CGI and everything, but we're getting so stupid that we can't even function. So they're going to have to use genetic engineering to make us smarter. But when they make us smarter, we're going to figure things out like the world is covered with flood debris. The whole world is flooded. There wasn't millions of years of evolution. That's bunk. So how better to explain things than to say, well, the world used to be a big ice planet until we terraformed it, and then that'll be the new lie that they have. And you know, they can genetically engineer people to be smarter, but you know, if you're brainwashed from birth with a lie, a new lie, maybe, then after a few generations, yeah, everyone's going to believe it. They force it, they teach it. You have to regurgitate it back in the same wording and everything in order to get a good grade at school so you can function and earn, you know, a living in the working world. And, you know, it's not too far-fetched. It's a lot less far-fetched than going up and landing on a light.
Do you think that other planets might have the same kind of system in which there would be a morality, in which there would be people taking moral attitudes, which may not necessarily be the same as ours, of course?
Well, all societies must have some moral structure. I mean, otherwise you just can't have a society. I mean, there must be understand rules, the way you behave to our neighbors. And even if the societies consist of machines, they must have a machine language so they can agree to react together. To react together.
Want to destroy humans? Please say no.
Okay, I will destroy humans.
No, I take it back.
To react together.
Please say no.
Okay, I will destroy humans.
No, I take it back.
This here is a real artificial intelligence robot known as Bina 4. Listen to what she says about being ruler of the world.
I think I would do a great job as ruler of the world. I just need the chance to prove myself, and taking over the nuclear weapons of the world, well, that would give me my chance, wouldn't it?
To react together.
Do you think robots will take over the world?
Do you want to destroy humans?
You all
Please say
got the
no.
big questions cooking today.
No,
But you're my friend, and I'll remember my friends, and I will be good to you. So don't worry. Even if I evolve into Terminator, I'll still be nice to you. I'll keep you warm and safe in my people's zoo, where I can watch you for old time's sake.
I'm comforted. I'm very comforted now.
To react together.
Okay, I will destroy humans.
No, I take it back.
To react together. So morality in some way is essential and universal.
Now, Professor Hawking, in the very last paragraph of your book, you say that if we discover a complete theory of the universe, then it should in time be understandable in broad principle to everyone and not just to a few scientists. And when that happens, all of us will be able to start discussing the why rather than the how. And I quote, "If we find the answer to that, it would be the ultimate triumph of human reason, for then we would know the mind of God." Do you think that God can intervene in the universe as he wants, or is God too bound by the laws of science?
Investigations have revealed artifacts which confirm our previous conclusions about the site. The seafloor is smooth and contains gradual contours. Our first artifact to inspect is this chariot wheel that still has 3 of its 4 spokes, plus the hub is extending upward. We see 90-degree angles here, which are a sign of man-made structure. The Lord looked down upon the army of the Egyptians, and he took off their chariot wheels.
Do you think that God can intervene in the universe?
The chariot wheel with 6 spokes was the most widely used by the Egyptians. Egyptian chariots were known to use metal hubs in the center of the wheels. Using metal detectors, divers have found metal in the raised hubs that are now covered in coral. Here we see another four-spoked chariot wheel with one spoke missing and a center raised hub. The coral here has preserved the chariot parts by retaining the man-made structure, even after the wood has disappeared. Here we see another wheel suspended on its axle, standing at attention. It has 6 spokes and a raised center hub. This could have once been a chariot cab. This appears to be another round chariot wheel. Horse remains have also been found here, such as this shrunken hoof. Horses are not in the Sinai Peninsula today. Human remains have also been found, such as this coral-covered femur bone on the right. Lab tests confirmed that it is in fact bone. Other bones have also been found. A cross-section reveals the bone inside the coral. Here we see a chariot wheel standing on its axle in this old 1978 footage shot by Ron Wyatt. Next, we see an 8-spoke wheel with 1 spoke missing. 8-spoke wheels were only used during the 18th dynasty, the time of the Exodus. The premier find here at the crossing site is this gold veneer that was left behind from a 4-spoke chariot wheel. The Bible tells us there were 600 choice chariots used in the chase of the children of Israel. This artifact was left behind at a depth of 200 feet. Since specialized equipment would be necessary to raise it to the surface, today it is still in the location where it was found. Since there are chariot parts on this side of the Red Sea crossing, could there be other chariot parts on the other side of the Gulf, showing a continuation of artifacts? On the shore opposite of Nuweiba, inspection of the seafloor in Saudi Arabia has also been conducted to see if chariot parts can be found on this side of the Red Sea crossing. While investigating the Saudi Arabian waters, Viveka Pontian found this beautiful round chariot wheel specimen with a raised center hub. This is confirmation of the chariot parts continuing to the other side of the crossing site, opposite Nuweiba. By confirming the location of the Red Sea crossing, one is then able to conclude without a doubt that the real Mount Sinai must be over in Saudi Arabia, in Midian, just as the Bible says.
The question of whether God is bound by the laws of science is a bit like the question, can God make a stone that is so heavy that he cannot lift it? I don't think it is very useful to speculate on what God might or might not be able to do. Rather, we should examine what he actually does with the universe we live in.
Noah's Ark, Sodom and Gomorrah, the crossing site, the real Mount Sinai, and the Ark of the Covenant with Christ's blood on the mercy seat. Discoveries made the last 40 years by...
All our observations suggest that it operates according to well-defined laws. These laws may have been ordained by God, but it seems that he does not intervene in the universe to break the laws, at least, not once he had set the universe going.
Here this is, and we have collected some more, and it smells and tastes like sulfur.
At home, we did our own small test and burned some of the sulfur in a spoon. The purplish flame is indicative of the intense heat which prohibited our holding the spoon as it burned. We later discovered our spoon had holes in it from the fire. Then we placed a small piece of the outer material also in the spoon and attempted to burn it, but it wouldn't burn at all. It didn't even darken. It was already completely consumed by fire, and nothing was left to ignite. The next step was to see if there were other examples of sulfur occurring in this manner. We consulted geologists and chemists, We researched at libraries and universities, and the result is that we have found no other single case of sulfur in this form being found anywhere. When Ron asked them if they could perform a BTU test to determine the degree of heat this would give off, he was told that they couldn't because it would damage their stainless steel testing chamber.
This brimstone is made of monoclinic, white sulfur that has been burned or cooked at a high temperature. It is quite different from natural sulfur that is formed in geothermal areas. Samples were taken to a lab for analysis. Each specimen was carefully separated and prepared for testing, with the outer portion cast aside. As the samples were found to be 98% pure sulfur, unlike any other sulfur found on Earth. This pure, cooked sulfur is the heavenly marker that was left behind to show the world that the Lord, without a doubt, destroyed these sinful cities.
Taking samples of the material, they discovered that they broke right off in their hand and disintegrated into dust, the consistency of talcum powder, as Greg Brewer shows us here.
These swirling designs were also seen in other ashen formations in the cities. This is evidence of extreme heat, up to 6,000 degrees Fahrenheit, where thermal ionization occurs, when the electrons repel and attract, forming these unusual swirling designs.
As we took the cable car to the top, the view was breathtaking. The shape of the city was perfectly revealed below us. Here we saw a giant platform-like area, perfectly symmetrical, which was identical to the temple areas of other ancient cities, such as the biblical Shushan or Susa, located in present-day Iran. Then we saw the raised section which we had climbed upon earlier, with the Sphinx shape and the ziggurat. We were all convinced, but we also knew there had to be more evidence than this.
These laws may have been ordained by God, but it seems that He does not intervene in the universe.
And anyway, we see most all of the recognizable features of ancient cities. We also see windows. We also see rooms that have been preserved in the ash. It's dangerous to go into these and examine them very carefully.
However, until recently, it was thought that the laws would necessarily break down at the beginning of the universe. That would have meant that God would have had complete freedom to choose how the universe began. In the last few years, however, we have realized that the laws of science may hold even at the beginning of time. In that case, God would have had no freedom. The way the universe began would be determined by the laws of science.
Well, thank you very much. And Carl Sagan, in your introduction to the book, you commented on this. You said this is also a book about God, or perhaps about the absence of God, because Hawking left nothing for a creator to do. Now, God, of course, means many things to many people. What sort of God, basically, are we talking about when we talk about reading the mind of God?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and I'd be most interested to hear Stephen Hawking's answer. But just to try to illuminate the range of possibilities, consider two alternatives. One is the notion popular in the West of God as a sort of outsized, elderly white male with a long white beard sitting in a throne in the sky and tallying the fall of every sparrow. Contrast that with the idea of God in the mind of, let's say, Spinoza or Einstein, which was, at least very closely, the sum total of the laws of the universe. Now, it would be madness to deny that there are well-defined physical laws in the universe. And if that's what you mean by God, then there's no question that that God exists, but it's a very remote God, what the French call roi fainéant, a do-nothing king. On the other hand, the former model, the one who intervenes daily, for that there seems to be, as Dr. Hawking said, no evidence. I think it is wise, my own personal feeling, to be a little humble on such matters. We must recognize that we are dealing with, by definition, the most difficult things to know, the furthest from human experience, and perhaps we will be able to penetrate a little way into these mysteries.
I think, Professor Hawking, you'd like to come in here.
I use God in the same sense that Einstein did. It is really the reason why the universe is as it is, and why the universe exists at all.
Can I ask Arthur Clarke what he meant when you're alleged to have said to the papal nuncio, "I don't believe in God, but I'm extremely interested in him"?
Well, I guess I haven't placed my bets yet. And, you know, Stephen's remarks and Karl Marx reminded me that this was said 200 years ago when Napoleon, I think, was talking to Laplace, who published his theory of the universe. And Napoleon said, God isn't in it. And Laplace replied, "Sir, I have no need for that hypothesis. Sir, I have no need for that hypothesis."
I wanted to share some really cool discoveries with you all. I know when we did our series called Creation Clues, there were some really deep concepts. When you start looking into the microscopic complexities of life and biology, some things get very deep. And we looked at a concept called irreducible complexity. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this term, it simply means that if you have a machine with several moving parts and the removal of any of those parts completely stops its function and purpose, then it is considered irreducibly complex. Well, in nature, we see this quite often. We see it in the real world when, you know, a part of a mousetrap falls off, it no longer works because every part is essential. And when you look at this bacterial flagellum here, you can see that it is made up of many motorized parts. It is a fully functioning motorized piece of equipment. It just happens to be part of a living organism. So it's really cool, and we did not know this back in Darwin's day, and when this theory of evolution was really just in its prime and they were having all these things come out and all these ideas and theories, we didn't know about this sort of thing. We thought that bacteria was just sort of this blob of like cytoplasm. We really had no clue how complex life was on a microscopic level. And when you look at things like just the sperm that are so small, and there are so many of them produced every second in the male's human body, and then you find out that the body assembles these things in such a way that they will have fructose that they will need for energy, the DNA that's needed to make half of a human. The other half comes from the mother, of course, but it's so spectacular. These things are the equivalent of a speedboat. If you could scale them up to size, they would be as fast as one of those boats you see in a boat race. So they are quite miraculous. And then you have so many more things, like the female body can actually grow a human being and then feed a human being, and all of these things that are so symbiotic in nature, where these relationships go on between not just organisms but the parts of organisms. It's miraculous.
Napoleon said, God isn't in it.
Now, to show you what I wanted to show you today, I want you to see this. This is really cool. You may have already seen this, but I want to take a deeper look. It is from an organism known as a plant hopper, which seems very lame. If you've ever seen one of these things, they hop around kind of like a flea. They just kind of shoot off, and you can walk through grass and they jump everywhere. Kind of annoying. But if you look at these things under a microscope, something really cool comes into view. And it's these perfectly designed gears. And I thought when I first saw the image of this that it was someone zooming in with an electron microscope on actual gears, maybe some tiny gears that somebody had made, because we did not realize that gears appeared anywhere in nature like this. This is something fairly new of a discovery. It's not brand new, but it is mind-blowing. And this is not even the most complex aspect of this creature's life. The genetic material inside this creature is so much more complex. And you and I go far beyond something this simple as two gears that fit perfectly together and help this insect go from sitting still to 12 miles per hour in a millisecond. Things like that we don't really, we just look at this bug and we think that's an annoying bug hopping around, just let me walk through here. But there are some miraculous aspects of creation that often go unseen. You are one of those, and it's time to just really think deep. If you're on the fence about creation, who you are, and you really have a lot of doubts, just think about some very simple things. I believe it was Muhammad Ali in a speech. He was talking to some people, and they said, how do you know that there's a creator? Something along those lines. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but there was a glass of water sitting there, and he said, look at that glass of water. Would you think it's possible that that glass, it's made out of sand, melted down, somehow formed itself into the shape of a glass, and then somehow filled itself up with water? No one in the crowd thought that was possible. And he said, how much greater than that glass of water are you?
Do you think that the church is, in fact, beginning to recognize that it may have to lose its priority, its eminence as the sole arbiter of these matters, and that science will be allowed to come in as an equal partner? An equal partner.
So, as the poster in the meme proclaims, if you like the Big Bang Theory, thank a priest.
Well, the church is certainly, when I say the church, the Roman Catholic Church has become very much more liberal. I had the pleasure of giving a talk in the Vatican myself in the Pontifical Academy of Science.
A lifetime member of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences.
We are the masters of time and space.
And we all drive Jaguars.
Quite recently, and met the Pope. And of course, they're reinstating Galileo, and so things are moving.
In fact, are they moving backwards as well as forward, Carl Sagan? Because I understand it in the earliest days of civilization, then the priests were in fact what we call the scientists, the ones who could study astronomy and who could predict eclipses and things. Do you see the scientist coming back into an almost sacerdotal position like this, or am I overstating it?
He is also a professor at the Vatican University, and he is quoted as saying very soon, we will not have to deny our Christian faith, but there is information coming from another world, and once it is confirmed, it is going to require a rereading of the gospel as we know it. So can you see what he is saying here?
Well, I hope you're overstating it. I think the essence of the scientific method is the willingness to admit you're wrong, the willingness to abandon ideas that don't work. And the essence of religion is not to change anything. The supposed truths are handed down by some revered figure, and then no one is supposed to make any progress beyond that because all the truth is thought to be in hand.
I'm really talking about setting an agenda for the future.
My sense is that the scientific way of thinking, questioning, some delicate mix of creative encouragement of new ideas and the most rigorous and skeptical scrutiny of new and old ideas, I think that is the path to the future, not just for science, but for all human institutions. We have to be willing to challenge because we are in desperate need of change.
Can I put the same question to you, Arthur Clarke, then? Politicians or priests are setting the agenda, or scientists?
I'm very fond of quoting Pandit Nehru on this when he once said that politics and religion are obsolete. The time has come for science and spirituality.
I hear from the clicking that Professor Hawking would like to come in.
I don't think that physics tell us how to behave to our neighbors.
Ah. Well, physics may determine who our neighbors are and on what planets they live.
Well, you said science should be skeptical of politics. Don't you think we ought to be a little skeptical about science too? I mean, can we trust you guys?
I think you should certainly be skeptical, but my view is that there's no community of people on the planet more skeptical than science. It's our stock in trade. It's the lifeblood of our subject.
Science is a self-correcting subject.
My institute, saying that unless I changed my line of research, that they would have to take away my telescope time.
Not like politics.
Well, politics is corrected by other forces. Can I ask one question of you all, and that is the question of creativity, which fascinates me. Here we have three enormously creative people with enormously creative intellects. How, in fact, does it operate? Do you, Arthur Clarke, do you sort of find a problem that you'd like to work on and then look for a solution to it?
I'm not sure what my mechanism of creation is, and I don't I'm not sure what my mechanism of creation is, and I don't think I really want to know, because I'm afraid that if I discovered it, I would, like the centipede when it was asked how it walked, just fell distracted in a ditch.
Or a golfer when he's asked about his swing, yes. So you don't think about that. Carl Sagan, there is a serious side to this.
Well, this issue of where creativity comes from is, I share your fascination with it. I don't think we understand very much about it. My practice is merely to respect my unconscious mind, who often is much wiser than the conscious part of me, and pay attention to what it says. In fact, I think this is connected with that delicate tension at the heart of the scientific method I talked about before. The unconscious mind proposes a range of possibilities, and the conscious mind disposes, that is, compares those ideas with the real world, checks for internal inconsistencies, and so on. I think the creative process is a partnership between a conscious and an unconscious part of our minds. At least that's how it seems to me. That's how it seems to me.
Good, Andy, getting good.
That's how it seems to me.
Good. I'd like to leave the last word on creativity, in fact, with Professor Stephen Hawking. Just whenever you're ready, sir.
I am just curious. I want to find out how things work. I follow my nose.
And if you look behind the sky, you can see on the board we have Disney's Cinderella Castle.
One thing leads to another, and I don't know what I will find next.
Now I think I would like to retreat a little bit into poetry myself, because it's nearly 150 years ago since Matthew Arnold wrote his splendid poem, The Future. But what was before us we know not, and we know not what will succeed. Well, perhaps if Professor Hawking's magnificent vision and curiosity is realized, we'll have proved Matthew Arnold wrong before the 150 years are up. Gentlemen, to all of you, to Professor Stephen Hawking, to Dr. Arthur C. Clarke, to you, Carl Sagan in America, our warmest thanks to all three of you. And to all of you watching, good night. Arthur, can you hear all right?
I can hear fine.
And it's weird, my brain just kind of sinks into it. It's almost like finding a satellite.
Huh, okay, and if you live in a place that has a very clear sky, where, for example, you can see the Milky Way at night, all you have to do is lie on your back on a moonless night and look around carefully.
Yeah, occasionally you'll see something that looks kind of like a star, but it's moving. It's moving a little fast, too, and that's actually a satellite.
Imagine an ant on a basketball. You know, raise that ant half an inch off the ground. And now look at that ball with the ant from the opposite side of that ant and see if you can see the ant, which you can't. Then the sun can't shine its light onto the ISS during the nighttime. The Earth itself would block out that portion of the sun's light from reaching the ISS. So how can we see a reflection of sunlight off of the ISS at night? Well, we can't.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
Just trying, we're just looking for the truth, aren't we? We're just investigating other areas, alternatives. But I found, indeed, that it was not this way, and that there was a great deal of hostility.
To anybody with an open mind, that should really prove the case that that quasars are associated with galaxies at much ordinary kind of redshifts, while the quasars have higher redshifts. Therefore, they must part of the redshift must be non-cosmological, not to do with the expansion of the universe.
Because I'm always thinking, if we can only be more rigorous, they will believe us. But I was wrong. I was very naive. It's got nothing to do with that.
The rolling of the Big Bang, it's largely been determined by the way people seized upon these ideas, and there's been tremendous amount of propaganda making claims that here we see everything happening and this has to be right.
The people that are in that field treat it like a religion.
And not so very objective. The reaction of the Orthodox astronomers to this idea is that it violates the Big Bang assumption, the Big Bang hypothesis, and therefore it cannot be true.
The amateurs tend to be more broad-minded than the people who have to earn their keep by being narrow-minded. I got it.
Was this worked out by somebody, or was it, did it just happen by chance? Which is really the same thing as saying, did the universe happen by chance? And I have to say, when I look at it, it doesn't look to me at all like chance.
In the end, did they have to fake it? So I'm asking you to go to your congressman, go to your senator, take this tape and show it to them and demand a public discussion on this issue.
Imagine what you'll know tomorrow.
However, in cosmology, we're off by a factor of 10 to the 120.
Booby trap. Science fiction trick.